So before we get to the real math, before we do the math for the whole statement of adjustments, we have to work on the portion adjusting the taxes itself. So remember, on the adjustment date, the conveyancers, right, that's what they're going to do. They're going to adjust the taxes. Now, cut off for the taxes, whoever owns the property, you guys know, July 1st. So Canada Day, they say, hey, before you get the fireworks, make sure you pay your taxes first, right? Then after you pay your taxes, we'll give you the fireworks. So cut off is July 1st. So whoever lived on the property on July 1st, he will pay his taxes. But my question is, when he's paying those taxes on July 1st, is he paying for the previous year, for this current year, or for the year coming up? And you know, when I had students in my classes, physical classes, a lot of times people had no clue what they're paying the taxes for. So what do you think we're paying those taxes for? For which year? Okay. We're paying it for this year, for the current year. So from January 1st till December 31st of this year, we paid the taxes on July 1st. So whoever lives on the property on July 1st, he pays the taxes for the whole current year, okay? And if the buyer has an adjustment date after July 1st, that means the buyer will have to give his portion back to the seller. So I'm going to explain you this visually because I'm a visual person. I'll show you this. So every time you have to do any adjustment on taxes, this is what you do first, okay? You draw the line, okay? You draw the line. You put your January 1st, December 31st, you put July 1st in here because that is cut off for the taxes in here, and then you put the adjustment date. Now, I don't know if he told you that before, but when it comes to exams, if you see any statement of adjustment questions that is math involved, your job is to always keep those questions as the last thing, okay? Last thing on the exam. You see one of those ones, especially when you start the exams, those ones you're going to come back to. Why? Because every single question is only worth 1 mark. They are easy questions, but it takes time. So I want you to collect all the other easy marks first, and only when you have extra time, you come back and do those questions. Okay? So first step of taxes is what that's been already been paid by the seller, right? By the vendor. So vendor has paid the annual taxes for the property in the amount of $1,200. The adjustment date is October 23rd. So on July 1st, the seller was a good boy. He paid his taxes for the whole year. And then he sold the property, and the buyer's adjustment day will be October 23rd. So that means the buyer will be adjusting, physically moving into this property from this date, and he only gonna have this portion of the dates. Do you see how that works? So your first question, you always want to ask yourself, who lived on the property on July 1st? Who was responsible for those taxes on July 1st? That is the first question you ask yourself. And if it's the seller who lived in here, that means he was responsible to pay the taxes for the whole year, okay? Whoever has the shortest dates on the line. So in this case, if I know buyer bought it from October 23rd, and I see that he only has from October 23rd till what? Till December 31st for this year to live in this property. You see his line is way shorter. Whoever's line is shorter, that's the person who will be paying the taxes to the other person. Okay, always, always, always. Whoever has less dates, he has to give the money back to the other person. Okay, if you keep it simple like this, you'll never get lost on these taxes. So who owes money to whom is the seller to the, buyer to the seller from October 23rd till December 31st, right? For this portion, because seller paid for the whole year, the buyer will have to reimburse back the seller, okay? So find whose portion, who is in the property for the smaller time, right? So whoever has a smaller time, that's the person who has to pay it back, okay? On the exam, they're not going to help you out with math. They're not going to hang the calendars to help you out. And okay, you forgot the month, sure, no problem. Look at the calendar. They're not going to let you use your phones. So the only thing you have is your knuckles, okay? Some people have their songs where they know how many days in each month, but if you don't know the song, this is my old-fashioned style, what I learned in school. It's called the knuckle method. So the knuckle goes like this. If the number goes, let's say if it's January, you start with January, it goes at the top of your knuckle, it's always 31 days. If it goes between the knuckles, right there in the middle, I don't know how you call that, then that's your 30 days. Okay, so whatever is on the top is your 31, whatever goes in is your 30. The only exception is February. It's always 28. There's never 29. There's always only 28. That's the only months that's less than 30 or 31. Okay, so we start from the top. So January is 31, February is 28. Okay, then it goes on top, which is March. If it's on top, that's 31. Okay, April goes in, that's your 30. Then it goes May on top, that's your 31. If it goes in for June, that's your 30. July on the top is your 31. And then if you're out of knuckles, you can add more, or I come back to the first one. So July and August, you see both of them are 31 days. Okay, and then it goes, what is it after July? August, September is 30, October is 31, right? And then goes November, December. So use your knuckles. Okay, I had a student in my class said, but this knuckle is bigger than this one. She passed the exam. Doesn't matter. If it's on the top, that's your 31, right? If it goes in, that's your 30 days. So don't question too much, right? If that works, use it, or you just memorize it because you need to know your dates, okay? And the reason we need to know the dates because we have to do the math, right? In this case, we will have to figure out whoever has less dates, we need to find out his dates out of the year, how many days out of the year he owes the money to the seller, right? So in this case, the buyer. So from October 23rd till December 31st. But before we get to the math, I have another question for you. Who is responsible for the taxes for this specific date, for October 23rd? Who is responsible for this specific date? Is that a buyer or seller? It is the buyer because that is his adjustment date. He already has, usually adjustment possession happens on the same date, right? So that's where he already physically possessed the property. So make sure that you treat that date as the buyer's date. So you cannot remove that date from his date. He needs to be responsible for that date. So I'll show you how it's done. Okay, so same question. We're working on this math in here. So we need to find out how many days is the buyer responsible out of the year, okay? So October, so January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October is 31 days is on top, right? So October 31, okay? Minus the 23, and then I do plus 1. And people say, what is that? So this is my calculation of the October days, okay? So October is 31 days in October, minus the date of the completion or adjustment, whatever is given to us, okay? But then I do plus 1. What is this plus 1? I add this day back in, because if I do minus 23, this specific day is out. And the buyer is responsible for that day. So I always have to do plus 1. So when you do the calculation of the buyer's statement of adjustment, make sure that you do that plus 1. Okay, plus 1 in this case. Okay, so this is how many days in October. Then I also have to do November. So if it's October, November is in 30. December is 31 is on the top, right? So I do those days plus 30 plus 31. It should come up to 70. Don't be lazy, pull up your calculators. Let's do the math. So buyer is responsible for 70 days out of the whole year. So you take 70 divided by 365, okay? Equals to this. Whatever that number comes up in there for you. And then you multiply by whatever the taxes were in the questions, because that's how much the taxes the seller paid for the whole year. Okay? So you took buyer's days, divided by 365, and then times it by whatever the taxes were given to you. Okay? And that will be the buyer's portion of the taxes. Now, look how this will show up on the statement of adjustments. So the buyer's statement of adjustments will have debit and credit. Okay, the seller statement of adjustments also going to have a debit and credit. So buyer will have to give this money back to the seller. So it will be a debit to him. Debit is when you say goodbye to the money. Bye-bye, out of your pocket, right? It's a debt to you in some way. Credit is when the money comes into you. So that 230 will show up as a debit to the buyer because it comes out of his bank account. And where does it go? It goes to the seller statement of adjustments. So it will show up as a credit to the seller. Okay? My question to you is, how about this $1,200? Is that going to show up on anybody's statement of adjustments? And the answer is no. Why? Because it's already being paid. So if something that is still owing, right, something in the future he has to pay, those ones will show up on the statement of adjustments. But if something already being paid, then this $1,200, don't touch it and don't put it anywhere else, okay? We're just working with the balances here. Okay, second example, taxes not paid by this seller. So now on July 1st, okay, instead of paying the taxes, seller went to Mexico and says, you know what, vacation time. And he never paid his taxes, okay? So property taxes in the amount of 1095 are due but have not been paid. Penalty now is owing of $105, and the adjustment date is August 31st. So draw the line. July 1st is here, okay? You put the adjustment date on the line too, right? August 31st. This is how you know the buyer moved in. Buyer's dates will be from what date to which date? From August 31st till the December 31st. Now, does it matter to the buyer if he paid the taxes or not? You see, as a conveyancer, they said, no. As a buyer, you're only responsible for your portion. And you have way less date than the seller, right? The seller has way more dates in here. So for that reason, who pays the money to who? The buyer will pay the money back to the seller. Whoever has less dates, that's the person that will be paying the money to the other person, okay? That's it. But you said, but the seller haven't paid to the buyer, it doesn't matter. He says, I'm only responsible for my portion, and I'm gonna take this portion and pay to the seller. Now, seller did not pay his taxes. Too bad for him, right? But he's still responsible for them, right? So he's responsible. Buyer will pay the money for his portion to the seller, okay? But my question is, before, okay, if I go back in the previous question, this $1,200 did not show up on the statement of adjustments because it's been what? It's been paid. But in this case, okay, it's not paid. He went to Mexico. Is this 1095 will show up on the statement of adjustments? Yes, it will. Okay, how about this 105? It's a penalty. Who pays for this penalty? Do you think the buyer will pay that penalty or the seller? Seller is the one who haven't paid the taxes. That's his penalty. So his lawyer will put this 1095 and 105 as a debit or credit to the seller. As a debit to the seller because he still has to pay those money. Okay? Okay, so because it's not being paid, do you see how it shows up as a debit to the seller and penalty of 105 debit to the seller? Now, is that something to do with the buyer? Is this 1095 or 105 will show up on the buyer statement of adjustments? The buyer says, I don't care, not my problem. My problem is to pay my portion to you. That's all I care about, right, as a buyer. So the buyer's days, tell me what dates are he's responsible for? From August 31st till December 31st, right? That's his dates in here. So you need to find out how many days out of the year that is. How many days in August? If you do the math, it's going to be on the top. It's going to be your 31 days, okay? So 31 for August minus the date. So minus 31 plus 1. Why do we do plus 1? Because you want to add this date back to the buyer portion of the dates because he has to be responsible for that specific August 31st date, okay? So August 31 minus 31, okay? That's how many days in August minus that date plus 1 because you want to make sure that it's included for him. Then September, October, November, and December. That's how many more months we have to add. 30 days in September, 31 days in October, 30 in November, 31 in December. Add them all up. It's going to come up to 123. Do you math? Pause me. Make sure they actually do the math. Okay, don't just watch me. Okay, so he's responsible here. There's 123 days of his days out of the year. So what is his portion? Okay, he has a smaller portion. That means he needs to pay that to the seller. So that means it's going to be a debit to the buyer because the money is leaving his bank account, and it will be a credit to the seller. So even though the seller is still responsible to pay all this taxes and the penalty, right? But he's still going to receive that credit of $369 from the buyer. So what do you get that $369? You're going to take 123 divided by 365 days out of the year, and then you're going to times it. What number are you going to times it by? Okay? You're going to times it by the actual tax amount. Do not use the penalty. Penalty is a very specific number just to the seller because that's his penalty. Buyer is not responsible for that $105. Okay? So times it by 1095, and that will come up to that 369. So that means the buyer will give the 369 to the seller, so it will show up as a debit to the buyer, and it will be a credit of 369 to the seller. Okay, example number 3. Taxes not yet due. So that means it's in the future. That means the sale happens way before July 1st. You see what's happening here? So buyer bought the property and adjustment date was on March 10th. So my first question is, who is going to live in the property on July 1st? Who will be paying the taxes on July 1st? He says, buyer will pay it because he bought it from March 10th and he's planning to leave it there until December 31st. So that means the buyer is the one that will be responsible to pay the taxes in the future for the whole year. So that means who has to give the money back to who? Who has the shorter days? Is the seller. So my question is, from what day to what day is the seller responsible for the taxes? Don't cheat, don't look at your notes. From which date to which date? Okay, from January 1st till when? Watch. If you said March 10th, you just lost the mark, because who is responsible for March 10th itself? The buyer. Do you see how tricky it is? So from January 1st till March 9th. Good job. All right, so he's responsible from the March 9th. That's what he's responsible for. Okay, so how do we do the math in here? This is it's easier now. Right? So in January, there's 31 days. Okay, in February, there's always 28 days. And then in March, all we do is take the number 9, because from January 1st till the, right, so there's only 9 days in here. So that's how you don't have to do +1 in here. So if it happens after July 1st, you do always put that +1. But if it happens before, then you don't do the +1. Okay, so you do 31 plus 28 plus 9 days in here, right, for March. 9 days, only 9, not 10th. It will give you 68 days. And then what do you do with the 68 days? So that means seller is responsible for 68 days out of the 365. So you divide it by 365, and then you times it by whatever the taxes were given to you. So in the question about taxes with $1,200, then you times it by, where's the $1,200 here? Yeah, taxes are $1,200, so you're going to times it by the taxes that's given to you. Okay, so amount will be $223.56. So my question is, seller, because he has a smaller portion of days out of the year, he will be giving the money back to the buyer because he will be paying taxes at some point. So that means it's going to be a debit to the seller for that amount, right, to the buyer, and the buyer will be a credit off. So you will put that 223 as a credit to the buyer, but a debit to the seller, because he has to give the money to the buyer. It will come out of his bank account. So my next question is, in the future, there's $1,200 of taxes. Is this $1,200 will show up on the statement of adjustment? What do you think? No, because it's in the future. So the only time you're going to put the taxes amount, the full tax amount in your statement of adjustments, is when it's still owing. So somebody forgot to pay them, that's the only time you're going to add them to your statement of adjustments. Otherwise, you just do the adjustment itself. So once we've finished your tax adjustments, let's try the real question. So as I said, keep this type of questions as the last thing on the exam. Don't entertain them, okay? So only when you have a lot of extra time, you come back and do those type of questions, because it takes a lot of time for 1 mark.